All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to tackle a really fundamental question in economics. When we say one thing causes another, what are we really talking about? What's going on behind the scenes? We hear this kind of thing all the time, right? It's almost treated like a law of nature. But this step-by-step process, that chain of events that connects the cause to the effect, well, that's often a total mystery. And this isn't some new problem. The philosopher and economist David Hume noticed this way back in the 18th century. He saw that there was a pretty big time lag between new money hitting an economy and prices actually starting to go up. He could see there was this gap, and he knew something had to be happening in between. Right, so here's the key takeaway. It's not magic. An effect doesn't just pop into existence. There has to be some kind of process, a series of interactions that links that initial cause to the final effect. And getting a handle on that process, that's everything. So, how do we open this black box? Well, economists have a tool for this, and it's called a mechanism. This is how we start to peel back the layers and understand what's really going on under the surface of these big economic claims. I really love this description. A mechanism is literally the nuts and bolts of a cause and effect relationship. It's not just about saying that A causes B. It's about explaining how A actually causes B by, revealing all those inner workings. Okay, so here's where it gets a little interesting. The word mechanism can actually mean a few different things. It could just be the direct link or an intermediate step or even a piece of theory. But for what we're talking about today, that third one on the list, that's the one we really want to focus on. It's the most powerful. So yeah, we're zeroing in on this idea. A mechanism is the underlying structure. Think of it like the detailed story of how all the little actions of people, of companies, of banks all add up to create a massive high-level outcome like inflation. All right, so let's take this idea for a spin. It's time to crack open that black box we talked about, the one connecting money to inflation, by looking at what economists call the monetary transmission mechanism. Okay, so this is just a fantastic example of what we're talking about. It's not one single event. It starts with the central bank buying stuff like bonds. That leaves people in banks with a bunch of extra cash. Well, they don't want to just sit on that cash, so they use it to buy other things like stocks. That pushes asset prices up, people feel richer, that's the wealth effect, and they start spending more. And finally, all that extra demand for goods and services is what ultimately pushes prices up. See? Isn't that so much more satisfying? It's a whole story that walks you from the very first action all the way to the final outcome. But of course, this is economics. So the story isn't quite that simple. It never is. So identifying a mechanism is a huge leap forward, no doubt. But, and this is a big but, this whole approach comes with its own set of really deep challenges that make predicting things in economics just incredibly tough. First off, these causal chains can break at any point. Second, and this one's huge, a single cause can kick off multiple mechanisms that actually work against each other. And third, a lot of the time, we just don't know which mechanism is going to get triggered. Let's really dig into that second problem, the one about competition. This right here is one of the most fascinating and, let's be honest, frustrating things about economics. You can have a single policy change that's simultaneously pushing and pulling on behavior. And a perfect example of this is what happens when you have a high marginal tax rate. How does that affect someone's motivation to work? Okay, so on one side, you've got what's called the substitution effect. If taxes are really high on the next dollar you earn, the reward for working an extra hour is smaller. Basically, your free time suddenly looks a lot more appealing, so you might decide to work less. But wait, at the very same time, you've got the income effect pulling you in the complete opposite direction. That high tax rate means your paycheck is smaller, which might force you to work more hours just to keep up with your bills. So which one wins out? The push or the pull? The thing is, theory by itself, it can't tell us. It could go either way, depending on the person and their situation. And this uncertainty, it really shines a light on a basic limit of trying to use these mechanisms for prediction. Okay, and all of this brings us to what might be the most critical point of this whole explainer, that gap between our really neat, clean theories and, well, the messy reality of the actual world. Look, the models economists build are super useful, but let's be real, they're often built on big simplifications. Assumptions like everyone is perfectly rational and has all the information. What these models give us is a picture of a world that could exist, but it's not always the world we actually live in. So this is the distinction you have to remember. A model can show us a possible mechanism, a logical, theoretical way that A could lead to B. But that is not the same thing as showing us the actual mechanism at play out there in the real world. To get to that actual mechanism, you need hard data, you need real-world evidence, you need careful testing. And that, right there, is the fundamental challenge that economists grapple with every single day. It's this incredibly difficult, but absolutely essential, task of bridging that gap between our elegant theories and the complex, messy reality, so that we can truly understand the forces that shape our world. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.